I never hated black women. I just never saw them as equals. The confession came from a man worth $4 billion, standing in front of a room full of investors who had built empires on the same silent prejudice. Ethan Blackwell had spent 40 years perfecting the art of dismissal without malice, exclusion without anger. He didn't need hatred when indifference worked just as well. But on one November night, a woman walked into his world and shattered every assumption he'd built his life upon, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous, her undeniable presence. What happened next didn't just change one man. It exposed the invisible architecture of bias that powered entire industries. I invite you to follow this story to its conclusion. Like this video and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The Manhattan skyline glittered against the November night like a kingdom of glass and ambition. 40 floors above the city, the rooftop terrace of the Ashford Hotel held the kind of gathering that never made the society pages, not because it wasn't important, but because the people attending it controlled what made the pages in the first place. Ethan Blackwell stood near the eastern rail, a tumbler of 18-year Macallan resting loosely in his hand, watching the crowd with the detached assessment of a man who had learned to read rooms the way others read balance sheets. At 40, he had perfected the appearance of ease. His charcoal suit fit like intention. His dark hair, threaded with premature silver at the temples, gave him an air of authority that money alone couldn't buy. He didn't need to announce his presence. People felt it. Ethan. The voice came from his left, smooth, practiced, belonging to Marcus Chen, a venture capitalist who had made his first $100 million before 30. Hell of a turnout, though I'm surprised Delacroix showed. Thought he was still licking his wounds from the Singapore deal. Ethan's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. Pride heals faster when there's money involved. Marcus laughed, the kind of laugh men like them had perfected. Short, controlled, never too loud. You're a cold bastard, Blackwell. That's why you invest with me. It wasn't arrogance. It was arithmetic. Ethan had built Blackwell Capital into one of the most formidable private equity firms on the East Coast by understanding one fundamental truth. Sentiment was expensive. He made decisions based on data, not emotion. He hired the best, fired without hesitation, and never let personal feeling cloud professional judgment. The system worked. It had always worked. Who's the keynote tonight? Marcus asked, scanning the crowd. Some consultant, Ethan said dismissively. Operational efficiency expert. Harrington insisted we hear her out before the merger talks. Her? Apparently. Ethan took a sip of his scotch, letting the burn settle. He didn't care much about keynote speakers at these events. They were decoration. Intelligent decoration, perhaps, but ultimately forgettable. The real work happened in quiet corners, over drinks and unrecorded conversations. Well, if Harrington vouches for her, she's probably legitimate, Marcus said. That man doesn't waste time on mediocrity. Ethan didn't respond. His attention had snagged on something, or rather, someone, moving through the crowd near the bar. She walked like she owned the space but didn't need to prove it. Tall, with deep brown skin that caught the ambient light like polished mahogany, she wore a tailored black dress that was elegant without trying to impress. Her hair was natural, pulled back into a sleek, low bun that emphasized the sharp architecture of her face. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes that seemed to register everything without judgment. But it wasn't her appearance that arrested Ethan's attention. It was the way she moved, confident, unhurried. She didn't scan the room looking for important people to approach. She didn't position herself near power. She simply existed, completely self-contained, and somehow that made her more magnetic than anyone else present. Who is that? Ethan heard himself ask. Marcus followed his gaze. His eyebrows lifted slightly. No idea. You interested? Ethan didn't answer. He was already walking. He moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, navigating conversations without getting trapped in them. A nod here, a brief handshake there. Within 30 seconds, he was standing 3 feet from the woman, close enough to speak but not so close as to intrude. She was alone at the bar waiting for a drink. Her posture was relaxed but alert, the stance of someone comfortable in her own skin. Ethan positioned himself at the bar beside her, signaling the bartender with a subtle gesture. The McAllen, he said. Then, turning slightly toward her, "Can I get you something?" She glanced at him, her expression neutral but not unfriendly. "I've already ordered, but thank you." Her voice was smooth, controlled, with a precision that suggested every word was deliberate. Ethan found himself recalibrating. She wasn't impressed. She wasn't dismissive either, just unaffected. "Ethan Blackwell," he said, extending his hand. She took it. Her grip was firm, professional. Nyla Reed. The name didn't register immediately, which surprised him. Ethan prided himself on knowing who mattered in his circles. "Are you here with one of the firms?" "In a sense," she said. The bartender returned with her drink, a gin martini, very dry. She thanked him and took a measured sip. "I'm speaking later." Realization clicked into place. "You're the consultant." Guilty. Her mouth curved slightly, the bare suggestion of amusement. "You sound surprised." "I don't get surprised often." "That must be boring." Ethan blinked. It had been years since anyone had spoken to him with that particular blend of directness and subtle challenge. Most people either deferred to him or tried too hard to impress him. Nyla Reed did neither. "I suppose it is," he admitted. She studied him for a moment, her dark eyes unreadable. "Let me guess, you're used to walking into rooms and knowing you're the most important person there." "That's an assumption." "Is it wrong?" He considered lying, then decided against it. "Not entirely. Honesty." She raised her glass slightly as if toasting the concept. "That's refreshing." "You don't strike me as someone who needs refreshing." "Everyone needs something, Mr. Blackwell." She set her glass down, her gaze steady on his. "The question is whether they're willing to admit it." There was something disarming about her. Not flirtation, this wasn't that. It was something sharper, more challenging. She wasn't trying to win him over, she was simply existing in his space as an equal, and the presumption of it fascinated him. "What do you think I need?" he asked. Nyla's smile widened slightly, and for the first time, Ethan saw genuine amusement in her expression. "I think you're used to asking questions, not answering them. I think you're used to control. And I think—" She paused, tilting her head slightly. "You're not used to women like me. Women like you. Women who don't care if you're impressed." Ethan felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not irritation, something closer to intrigue. "You're very confident." "I have reason to be." She picked up her drink again, her movements unhurried. "I've spent 15 years dismantling companies like yours and putting them back together stronger. I've sat across from men who think their money makes them untouchable, and I've shown them exactly where their operations are hemorrhaging value. So yes, Mr. Blackwell, I'm confident. And if that bothers you, you're welcome to find someone less competent." The challenge hung in the air between them, sharp and undeniable. Ethan realized with something like shock that he was enjoying himself. "I don't think I will," he said quietly. Nyla held his gaze for a beat longer, then glanced toward the center of the terrace where a small stage had been set up. "I'm on in 5 minutes. Try not to fall asleep." "I doubt that'll be a problem." She walked away without looking back, and Ethan stood at the bar, watching her go. Around him, the crowd continued its practiced rituals of networking and performance. But for the first time in years, Ethan Blackwell felt something other than control. He felt curious. Okay. The presentation began exactly on time. Nyla stood at the center of the small stage, a single spotlight cutting through the dim ambiance of the rooftop. She didn't use notes. She didn't rely on slides filled with corporate jargon and buzzwords. She simply spoke, her voice clear and measured, dissecting operational inefficiencies with surgical precision. "Most firms fail not because they lack talent," she said, her gaze sweeping the audience, "but because they mistake activity for progress. You hire brilliant people, then bury them in redundant processes and outdated hierarchies. You measure hours instead of output. You reward loyalty over results. And then you wonder why your competitors are outpacing you." Ethan stood near the back, arms crossed, listening. Around him, executives shifted uncomfortably. Nyla wasn't offering platitudes. She was calling them out. "Operational efficiency isn't about cutting costs," she continued. "It's about cutting waste. It's about identifying the bottlenecks in your systems, the points where talent gets stuck, where communication breaks down, where decision-making slows to a crawl. And more often than not, those bottlenecks exist at the top. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Nyla didn't flinch. Leadership, she said, her tone sharpening, is the most common point of failure in high-performing organizations. Not because leaders are incompetent, but because they stop questioning themselves. They surround themselves with people who agree with them. They mistake confidence for correctness. And they create cultures where challenge is seen as disloyalty. Ethan felt the words land like a blade between his ribs. She wasn't talking to the room. She was talking to him. "So here's my question for you," Nyla said, her gaze finding his across the crowd. "Are you leading, or are you just protected?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Then slowly, applause began. Polite at first, then genuine. Nyla stepped down from the stage, composed and unreadable, and disappeared into the crowd. Ethan stood motionless, his mind turning over her words like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Protected. He had built walls so high, so carefully, that he had stopped noticing they existed. An hour later, the crowd had thinned. The gala had shifted into its final phase. Small clusters of conversation, late-night deals whispered over drinks. Ethan found Nyla near the north edge of the terrace, alone again, gazing out at the city. He approached without hesitation this time. "That was a hell of a presentation," he said. She glanced at him, her expression neutral. "You didn't fall asleep. I'm impressed." "You meant what you said, about leadership." "I always mean what I say, Mr. Blackwell." "Ethan." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And I think you were talking about me." Nyla turned to face him fully, her dark eyes steady. "I was talking about a lot of people in that room. If you saw yourself in it, that's your insight, not mine." "You don't pull punches." "No." She took a sip of her drink. "I don't." "Why consulting?" Ethan asked. "You could be running your own firm." "Who says I'm not?" He paused. "You are." "Read Global Solutions," she said simply. "Operational consulting, organizational design, strategic restructuring. 12 years, clients in 18 countries. And before you ask, yes, we're profitable." Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Not attraction, exactly. Recognition. "You've been in the room this whole time." "I've been in a lot of rooms, Ethan. The difference is, I don't need to announce myself." He studied her, this woman who had walked into his world and refused to be diminished by it. "Have dinner with me." Nyla raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "Dinner. Tomorrow night. No agenda. Just conversation." She tilted her head, considering. "You're used to getting what you want." "Usually." "And you think I'm something you can want?" "I think," Ethan said carefully, "you're someone I'd like to know better." For a long moment, Nyla said nothing. Then slowly she smiled. "One dinner, but I choose the place." "Done?" "And Ethan?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to something just above a whisper. "Don't expect me to be impressed by your money. I have my own." She walked away, leaving him alone at the rail, staring out at the city with a strange, unfamiliar feeling spreading through his chest. It felt like the ground shifting beneath his feet. The next evening, Ethan arrived at the address Nyla had sent him, an unassuming bistro in Brooklyn, far from the Michelin-starred establishments he usually frequented. It was intimate, warm, the kind of place where the food mattered more than the presentation. Nyla was already seated when he arrived, dressed in a simple cream blouse and dark jeans. She looked impossibly elegant. "You're late," she said without looking up from her menu. "Traffic." "Liar." She glanced at him, eyes sparkling with amusement. "You're late because you spent 20 minutes deciding whether to bring flowers." Ethan froze. "How? You strike me as the type who overthinks gestures." She set down her menu. "Did you bring them?" "No?" "Good. I would have been disappointed." He sat down across from her, feeling off balance in a way that was becoming familiar. "You're enjoying this." "Immensely." They ordered wine, a bold red she recommended, and for the first hour, they talked about nothing important: books, travel. The absurdity of New York rent prices. Nyla was sharp, funny, unguarded in a way that surprised him. She didn't perform. She simply was. Tell me something true, Ethan said eventually, his voice quieter. Nyla looked at him over the rim of her glass. About what? About you, something you don't tell clients. She considered the question, then set her glass down. I grew up in Detroit. My father was a line worker at a GM plant. My mother cleaned houses. I put myself through Michigan on scholarships and student loans, and I spent my 20s proving to people that I belonged in rooms they didn't think I should be in. Ethan listened, something tightening in his chest. I've been underestimated my entire life, Nyla continued, not because I wasn't capable, but because people looked at me and made assumptions. So I stopped waiting for permission. I stopped asking for validation. I built my own table. And now? Now I help other people build theirs. She met his gaze, unflinching. Your turn. Tell me something true. Ethan hesitated. He wasn't used to this, vulnerability disguised as conversation. I've spent my entire life, he said slowly, building walls. I learned early that emotions were liabilities, that attachment made you weak. So I didn't attach, I just built. And now? He looked at her, this woman who had walked into his life like a storm he didn't see coming. Now I'm starting to wonder what I've been protecting myself from. Nyla held his gaze, and for a moment the restaurant disappeared. It was just the two of them, suspended in something neither of them had words for. Ethan, she said softly, I'm not here to fix you. I know. And I'm not interested in being someone's project. I know that too. Then what are we doing? He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. I don't know, but I'd like to find out. Nyla didn't pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers through his, and in that small gesture, something shifted, something neither of them could take back. Over the following weeks, Ethan and Nyla fell into a rhythm that defied his every expectation. They met for dinners that stretched into midnight. They walked through Central Park arguing about philosophy and policy. She challenged him on everything, his assumptions, his privilege, his carefully constructed worldview, and he found himself changing, not performing change, actually changing. You don't listen, Nyla said one evening as they sat in her apartment, a modest but beautifully designed space in Fort Greene. You hear, but you don't listen. There's a difference. Explain it to me. Listening means sitting with discomfort. It means letting someone else's truth exist even when it contradicts yours. She leaned back against the couch, her gaze steady on him. You've spent your whole life being right, Ethan. It's made you powerful, but it's also made you lonely. The words hit harder than they should have. I'm not lonely, he said, but the denial sounded hollow even to him. Nyla didn't argue. She just watched him, waiting. Fine, Ethan said finally. Maybe I am. That's a start. What do you want from me? The question came out sharper than he intended. I want you to see me, Nyla said quietly, not as a challenge, not as something you need to win, just me. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something crack open inside him. I do see you, he said, his voice rough. That's the problem. Why is it a problem? Because he stopped, struggling to find words for something he had never named. Because I've spent 40 years believing that people like you, he faltered. People like me, Nyla repeated, her voice carefully neutral. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. She stood, crossing to the window. Say it, Ethan, whatever you're thinking. Say it out loud. He felt his stomach turn. I was raised to believe that certain people belonged in certain places, that there was an order to things, a hierarchy. And where did I belong in that hierarchy? The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Not here, Ethan admitted, the words tasting like ash. Not in my world. Nyla turned to face him, and he saw something in her expression he had never seen before. Not anger, but something worse. Disappointment. Thank you, she said quietly, for your honesty. Nyla, I need you to leave. Please. Now. Ethan stood, his chest tight. He wanted to argue, to explain, to take back the poison he had just released into the room, but he saw the finality in her posture, and he knew. He had just broken something he didn't know how to fix. He left without another word. For 3 days, Ethan tried to reach her. Calls went unanswered. Texts disappeared into silence. He showed up at her office and was politely but firmly turned away. On the 4th day, he sat in his penthouse office, staring at the city below, and finally let himself feel the full weight of what he had lost. Not just Nyla, but the version of himself he had been becoming. The man who had started to question, to listen, to see beyond the walls he had spent a lifetime building. He had destroyed it with 6 words. Not in my world. His assistant, Claire, knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Blackwell, Mr. Harrington is here to see you." Ethan straightened, composing himself. "Send him in." James Harrington entered, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, a man who had built his fortune through strategic patience and calculated risk. He sat down across from Ethan without preamble. "You look like hell," Harrington said. "I'm fine." "Liar." Harrington leaned back, studying him. "This is about Nyla Reed." Ethan's head snapped up. "How?" "I've known Nyla for 10 years, Harrington said calmly. "She consulted on 3 of my acquisitions. Brilliant woman, uncompromising. She called me 2 days ago." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What did she say?" "She asked me if I knew what kind of man you were." Harrington's gaze was steady, unflinching. "I told her I didn't know anymore." "James, I'm not here to lecture you, Ethan, but I am going to tell you something, and you're going to listen." Harrington leaned forward. "Men like us, we're taught that power is protection, that distance is strength. We're taught to see the world as a hierarchy, with us at the top. And for a long time that works, until one day you wake up and realize you've built a kingdom, but you're standing in it alone." Ethan said nothing. He couldn't. "Nyla Reed is the kind of woman who comes along once in a lifetime," Harrington continued. "Not because she's perfect, but because she's real. And if you let your own prejudice, your own fear, cost you that connection, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." "I don't know how to fix this." "Then figure it out." Harrington stood. "Because the man I've known for 15 years, the man I respect, wouldn't give up this easily." He left, and Ethan sat alone in the gathering darkness, his mind racing. Harrington was right. He had spent his entire life protected by walls he had never questioned. It was time to tear them down, even if it cost him everything. The following morning arrived with the kind of gray, persistent rain that seemed to mirror Ethan's state of mind. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, watching water streak down the glass, distorting the city below into abstract shapes. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Nyla's face, the disappointment that had replaced the warmth he'd grown accustomed to seeing there. His phone buzzed. Another message from Marcus Chen, the 3rd one that week asking about lunch. Ethan ignored it. He ignored most things now. Work continued around him, deals moved forward on momentum alone, but he felt disconnected from all of it, as if he were watching his own life from behind glass. "Mr. Blackwell?" Claire's voice came through the intercom, tentative. "Your 9 o'clock is here." Ethan glanced at his watch. He'd forgotten about the meeting entirely. "Give me 5 minutes." He straightened his tie, splashed cold water on his face in the executive bathroom, and tried to summon the version of himself that commanded rooms. But when he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back. The certainty that had always lived in his eyes had been replaced by something uncertain, something searching. The meeting was with potential investors for a tech acquisition. Routine, straightforward. But halfway through his presentation, Ethan found his attention drifting. One of the investors, a woman named Patricia Summers, was asking pointed questions about company culture and diversity initiatives. The old Ethan would have deflected smoothly, offering corporate-approved answers that meant nothing. Instead, he heard himself say, "Honestly, Mrs. Summers, we've paid lip service to diversity without doing the actual work. We've hired for optics, not inclusion, and that needs to change." The room went silent. His own team looked at him as if he'd started speaking a foreign language. Patricia Summers leaned back in her chair, studying him with new interest. That's a refreshingly honest answer, Mr. Blackwell. What changed your mind? Someone made me see what I'd been refusing to look at, he said quietly. After the meeting ended, successfully, surprisingly, Claire caught him in the hallway. Sir, are you feeling all right? That was different. Different bad? Different honest. She hesitated. If you don't mind me saying, it's good to see. Ethan nodded, unable to find words. He returned to his office and did something he hadn't done in years. He pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. Not an email, not a text, an actual letter. He wrote for an hour, crossing out lines, starting over, trying to capture in words what he barely understood himself. When he finished, he read it through once, sealed it in an envelope, and called a courier service. I need this delivered personally, he said, to Nyla Reed at Reed Global Solutions. No signature required, just place it in her hands. He gave the address, hung up, and sat back in his chair, feeling more exposed than he'd ever felt in his life. The letter would either open a door or close it permanently. All he could do was wait. 3 days passed with no response. Ethan threw himself into work with an intensity that alarmed even his most demanding colleagues. He restructured 2 departments, initiated a company-wide audit of hiring practices, and fired a senior VP who had been with the firm for 12 years after discovering evidence of discriminatory behavior in performance reviews. You're making enemies, his CFO, Robert Keene, warned during a tense Friday afternoon meeting. Davidson had allies on the board. They're asking questions. Let them ask, Ethan said flatly. If they have a problem with firing someone who referred to female employees as too emotional for leadership roles in written evaluations, they can bring it to me directly. Robert blinked. Since when do you care about that kind of thing? Since I realized I've been complicit in it for 2 decades. Ethan stood, gathering his papers. Schedule a board meeting for next week. I want to present a comprehensive diversity and inclusion initiative. Ethan, I don't think you understand the pushback you're going to face. I understand perfectly. He met Robert's gaze. And I'm doing it anyway. He left the office that evening feeling hollowed out but strangely lighter, as if each decision to do the right thing instead of the easy thing was chipping away at the armor he'd worn for so long. He was almost to his car when his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Blackwell. You wrote me a letter. Nyla's voice, after days of silence, hit him like a physical force, an actual handwritten letter. Ethan stopped walking. Around him, the parking garage echoed with the sounds of departing cars, but all he could hear was her. You got it. I got it. A pause. You said you'd been wrong, that you'd spent your life building walls around prejudices you never examined, that you didn't know how to tear them down, but you wanted to try. All true. You also said, her voice caught slightly, you said you didn't expect me to forgive you, that you wouldn't blame me if I never spoke to you again, but that you needed me to know you were changing, whether or not I was there to see it. Ethan leaned against his car, his heart hammering. I meant every word. I know. Another pause. I've been watching. Watching? James Harrington called me, told me you fired Davidson, that you're pushing for real institutional change at Blackwell Capital. Her voice softened. That you're making yourself unpopular with people whose approval you've spent decades courting. They'll get over it. Will they? She asked. Or are you about to learn what it's like to be excluded from spaces you thought were yours by right? The question landed with precision. Maybe I need to learn that. Silence stretched between them, but it felt different now. Less final. I'm at Prospect Park, Nyla said finally. Near the boathouse. If you want to talk, you know where to find me. The line went dead. Ethan was in his car and driving before he consciously decided to move. 40 minutes later, he found her sitting on a bench overlooking the lake. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast, casting everything in muted tones. Nyla wore jeans and a gray sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked up as he approached, her expression guarded, but not hostile. You came, she said. You knew I would. I hoped. She gestured to the bench beside her. Sit. He sat, maintaining careful distance, afraid that too much proximity would shatter whatever fragile thing was forming between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. They watched ducks glide across the water, the park slowly coming back to life after the rain. "I've been angry with you," Nyla said finally. "Furious, actually, because you confirmed something I'd suspected but hoped wasn't true." Ethan's chest tightened. "That I was exactly the kind of man you've spent your life proving wrong." "Yes," she turned to face him, "but I've also been angry with myself." "For what?" "For wanting to forgive you." Her voice was steady but raw. "For reading your letter and feeling my anger start to crack. For checking the news to see if the stories about you were true. For sitting here hoping you'd come, even though part of me knows I should walk away." "Why haven't you?" "Because I saw something in you that night at the gala," she said quietly. "Something underneath all that armor. A person who was capable of questioning himself, of changing. And I keep wondering if I was right, or if I was just seeing what I wanted to see." Ethan looked at her, this brilliant, uncompromising woman who had somehow seen past his defenses to the uncertain man beneath. "You were right. You've been right about everything. Don't do that." "Do what?" "Give me what you think I want to hear." Her eyes flashed. "I don't need you to perform growth, Ethan. I need you to actually do it." "I am." The words came out more forcefully than he intended. "I fired Davidson. I'm restructuring my entire organization. I'm making enemies of people I've worked with for years. And you know why?" "Why?" "Because you made me see myself clearly for the first time in my life. And I hated what I saw." His voice cracked slightly. "I hated that I'd built my entire existence on a foundation of unexamined privilege, that I'd dismissed people, entire groups of people, without ever questioning why. That I'd looked at you that first night and felt surprised that you were brilliant, as if your brilliance was somehow unexpected instead of exactly what you'd earned." Nyla's expression shifted, softening at the edges. "I don't know how to undo 40 years of conditioning," Ethan continued. "I don't know how to see all my blind spots or challenge every assumption, but I'm trying, and I'll keep trying whether you're there or not, because you were right. I've been lonely. I've been protected and powerful and completely alone. And for the first time, I want something more." "What do you want?" He looked at her, this woman who had walked into his world and refused to shrink. "I want to be worthy of you." Tears gathered at the corners of Nyla's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Ethan, you can't make me your reason for changing. That's too much weight. I can't be responsible for your redemption." "You're not." He shifted closer, still not touching. "You're the catalyst, but the work is mine." She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her processing, weighing, deciding. "If we do this, if we try, you need to understand something. I will not make myself smaller to fit into your world. I will not smile through microaggressions or pretend I don't notice when your colleagues treat me like I'm an accessory instead of a person. I wouldn't ask you to. And there will be pushback," Nyla continued. "Your world, those people at the gala, your investors, your social circle, they're not going to welcome me. Some of them are going to resent me. Some are going to assume I'm with you for your money or that you're with me to prove something. Can you handle that? Can you?" "I've been handling it my entire life." Her voice was steady. "The question is whether you can. Because the moment things get difficult, the moment your reputation takes a hit, or deals fall through because you're with a black woman who doesn't know her place, you need to be certain you won't resent me for it." Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. "I will never resent you for being exactly who you are." "You say that now, Nyla." He squeezed her fingers gently. "I spent 40 years protecting myself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. I built walls so high I couldn't see over them. And then you walked into my life and started tearing them down brick by brick, whether you meant to or not. I'm scared. I'm uncertain. But I'm not confused. I know what I want. And I want you." She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him. "This isn't going to be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. I need time," she said. "I need to see that the changes you're making are real, that they last when things get hard. I'll give you all the time you need. And I need you to understand that I'm not going to fix you. I'm not your salvation. I'm just a woman trying to live her life with dignity and purpose. I know. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. And I'm just a man trying to become someone worthy of walking beside you. Nyla's expression cracked, and this time she didn't stop the tears. You infuriating man. Is that a yes? That's a maybe. She wiped at her eyes with her free hand, laughing softly through the tears. A cautious, skeptical, don't screw this up maybe. Relief flooded through Ethan so intensely it left him breathless. I'll take it. They sat together on the bench as the late afternoon light began to break through the clouds, their hands still joined, and for the first time in days, Ethan felt something like peace. But peace, he was about to learn, was a fragile thing. The first warning came 3 days later. Ethan was in a quarterly review meeting with his senior leadership team when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from his head of communications, Jennifer Walsh. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway. What is it? He asked. We've got a problem. Jennifer's voice was tight. Page 6 is running a piece tomorrow morning. Billionaire Blackwell's new diversity initiative comes with a diverse girlfriend. They have photos of you and Nyla together at Prospect Park. Ethan's jaw clenched. How did they... Does it matter? The point is, they're framing your institutional changes as performative, as if you're only doing it because you're dating a black woman, not because it's the right thing to do. That's not true. I know that. You know that. But optics matter, Ethan. And right now, the optics are that you're using social justice language to justify a relationship that's going to make you unpopular with your traditional investor base. I don't care about the optics. You should. Jennifer's voice sharpened. Because Davidson has allies, and they're circulating the story. They want to make you look weak, like you've gone soft, like you've let a woman, specifically a black woman, change your entire business philosophy. She did change my philosophy, Ethan said flatly. I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm asking you to be strategic. Put out a statement. Frame the narrative on your terms before they do it for you. Ethan thought of Nyla, of her warning that his world wouldn't welcome her. This was just the beginning. No statement. If they want to write about my relationship, let them, but I'm not giving them ammunition by responding. Ethan, I'll talk to Nyla. Make sure she's prepared, but I'm not hiding this. He ended the call and immediately dialed Nyla's number. She answered on the second ring. Hey, everything okay? Page 6 is running a story tomorrow about us. They have photos. A beat of silence. What kind of story? The kind that questions whether my commitment to institutional change is genuine or just a PR move because I'm dating you. He heard her exhale slowly. Well, that didn't take long. I'm sorry. Don't be. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the steel beneath it. I told you this would happen. People like your world when it's predictable, when it reinforces what they already believe. The moment you challenge that, they come after you. They come after both of us. She paused. Are you ready for that? Ethan thought about his board, his investors, the carefully maintained relationships that had taken decades to build. He thought about the life he'd constructed, brick by brick, on foundations he'd never questioned. And then he thought about Nyla. Her brilliance, her courage, the way she'd refused to make herself smaller for anyone. Yes, he said. I'm ready. Then we face it together. The article hit the next morning like a grenade. The photos were innocuous. Ethan and Nyla on the bench at Prospect Park, their hands joined, but the accompanying text dripped with insinuation. It painted Ethan as a man whose sudden interest in diversity was suspiciously timed with his relationship. It quoted anonymous sources within Blackwell Capital, suggesting the changes were causing internal discord. It even managed to dig up old quotes from Ethan about maintaining company culture, using his own past words as evidence of hypocrisy. But the worst part was the way it framed Nyla. Not as a successful businesswoman in her own right, but as the catalyst for a powerful man's crisis. As if her only relevance was her relationship to him. Ethan called her immediately. Have you seen it? Everyone's seen it. Her voice was calm, but he heard the undercurrent of anger. My phone's been ringing all morning. Clients wanting to know if the relationship affects our working relationship. Colleagues asking if I'm okay. Even my mother called. What do you want me to do? Nothing. The word was firm. This is exactly what I expected. They can't attack you for changing, so they attack me for supposedly causing it. It's a pattern. Black women are always either invisible or the cause of good men's downfall. You're not. I know I'm not. She cut him off gently. But that doesn't change the narrative they're building. And Ethan, you need to prepare yourself. This is just the first wave. It's going to get worse before it gets better. She was right. By the end of the week, 2 major investors had requested meetings to discuss the direction of the firm. A think piece appeared in Forbes questioning whether Ethan's changes represented genuine evolution or a midlife crisis disguised as social consciousness. And at a charity gala that Saturday night, one Ethan had been attending for 15 years, he felt the shift in the room the moment he walked in. Conversation stopped. Eyes followed him. The warm familiarity he'd always taken for granted had been replaced by something colder, more assessing. He moved through the crowd feeling like a specimen under observation, and for the first time he understood viscerally what Nyla had been trying to tell him. This was what it felt like to not belong. Marcus Chen found him near the bar. Hell of a week you've had. That's one way to put it. People are talking. Marcus glanced around, lowering his voice. Some of them aren't happy about the changes you're making. They think you're overreacting. To what? To... Marcus hesitated. Look, I'm not saying I agree with them, but there's a feeling that you're letting personal issues influence business decisions. Personal issues. Ethan's voice went flat. You mean Nyla? I mean the timing of everything. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. The firing, the new initiatives, the public relationship with someone who's what? Ethan stepped closer, his voice dangerous. Say it. Marcus had the grace to look ashamed. Someone who doesn't come from this world. No. Ethan set his drink down on the bar with deliberate care. She doesn't come from this world. She built her own world. And it's better than ours. Ethan, I'm done with this conversation. He walked away, his heart pounding with something that felt like grief and liberation mixed together. He was halfway across the room when he heard the voice, drunk, loud, carrying across the space with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences. There he is! Manhattan's most eligible bachelor, slumming it these days. Ethan turned. The speaker was Trevor Ashford, heir to a hotel fortune, a man Ethan had known casually for years. Trevor stood with a cluster of similarly affluent men, all of them holding drinks, all of them looking at Ethan with expressions that ranged from amusement to contempt. Leave it alone, Trevor, someone muttered. Why? I'm just making conversation. Trevor's smile was ugly. I'm curious about Blackwell's new social project. Tell me, Ethan, is she as grateful as everyone assumes? The room seemed to contract. Around them, conversations died. People turned to watch. Ethan felt something white-hot ignite in his chest. He walked toward Trevor with deliberate slowness, and the man's smile faltered. What did you just say? Ethan's voice was quiet, deadly. Trevor tried to laugh it off. Oh, come on, we're all thinking it. You're what, 40? Having some kind of midlife awakening with... Ethan's fist connected with Trevor's jaw before he finished the sentence. The impact sent Trevor stumbling backward into his friends. Gasps erupted around them. Someone screamed. Security started moving toward them, but Ethan didn't care. He stood there, his knuckles throbbing, staring at Trevor's shocked face, and felt absolutely no regret. Her name, Ethan said clearly, so everyone could hear, is Nyla Reed. She is brilliant, successful, and more valuable than everyone in this room combined. And if any of you... He looked around at the crowd, at faces he'd known for years. Ever disrespect her again, in my presence or otherwise, you'll answer to me. He turned and walked out of the gala, leaving behind 20 years of carefully maintained social capital, and felt freer than he'd ever felt in his life. The video hit social media within an hour. Someone had filmed the entire confrontation on their phone, and by the time Ethan reached his apartment, it had already been shared thousands of times. He watched it once, his jaw tight, seeing himself land the punch in high definition, hearing his own voice ring out across the ballroom with absolute clarity. The comments section was a war zone, half the people calling him a hero, the other half questioning his sanity and his business judgment. He poured himself a scotch and called Nyla. She answered immediately. I saw. I'm sorry. For what? Her voice held something he couldn't quite identify. For defending me? For finally showing everyone who you really are? For making things harder for you? He sank onto his couch, exhaustion settling into his bones. Tomorrow, the story won't be about what Trevor said. It'll be about my loss of control, my volatility, and they'll find a way to blame you for it. Let them. She was quiet for a moment. Ethan, I've spent my entire career watching men like Trevor say whatever they want about women like me. I've smiled through it. I've risen above it. I've been dignified and professional and everything society tells us we have to be to earn basic respect. And you know what? It never stopped them. They just got quieter about it. So what are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time someone hit back. He heard the smile in her voice. Though I would have preferred you break his nose. Despite everything, Ethan laughed. You're not mad? I'm furious, but not at you. Her voice softened. I'm angry that we live in a world where a man can say those things about me at a public event and expect no consequences. I'm angry that you'll face more criticism for defending me than he'll face for degrading me. But I'm not angry at you for standing up. That took courage. It took rage. Sometimes those are the same thing. She paused. Where are you? Home. You? In my car. Outside your building. Ethan stood walking to the window. 40 floors down, he could just make out her car in the circular drive. Come up. Are you sure? The optics? I don't care about optics anymore. He was already moving toward the door. I care about you. Come up. 5 minutes later, she was in his apartment, and he was pulling her into his arms before the door fully closed. She held him just as tightly, her face pressed against his chest, and for a long moment they simply stood there, anchoring each other against the storm they both knew was coming. They're going to come after you, Nyla said finally, her voice muffled against his shirt. Your board, your investors, everyone who benefits from keeping things exactly as they are. They'll say you're unstable, that you're making decisions based on emotion instead of logic. They'll try to force you out. Let them try. He pulled back enough to look at her. I've spent 2 decades building that company into what it is. They don't get to take it from me because I finally decided to act like a human being instead of a machine. You might not have a choice. There's always a choice. He cupped her face in his hands. And I'm choosing you. I'm choosing this. Whatever comes next, we face it together. She searched his eyes, and whatever she saw there made her expression soften. You really mean that? Every word. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, and he kissed her back with everything he had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. I'm terrified, she admitted. So am I. But I'm also... She laughed softly. I'm also happier than I've been in years. How is that possible? Because we're finally being honest. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. About who we are. About what we want. About what we're willing to fight for. They spent the night talking, planning, preparing for the battles they knew were coming. Nyla pulled up the Forbes article on her tablet, and they read through it together, analyzing the arguments, identifying the patterns. This part here, she said, highlighting a paragraph. They're questioning your judgment, suggesting that emotional decision-making is clouding your business acumen. It's classic. They can't argue against diversity and inclusion directly. That's too obviously wrong. So they attack your competence instead. How do I counter that? With results. She set the tablet down. You show them that your changes are making the company stronger, not weaker. Better talent retention, broader market reach, innovation from diverse perspectives. You make the business case so airtight they can't dismiss it. Ethan nodded slowly. I have the data. Employee satisfaction surveys are up since I fired Davidson. We've had more qualified applicants for open positions in the last month than in the previous 6 months combined. Then use it. Nyla leaned back against the couch. But Ethan, you need to understand something. Even if you prove them wrong, even if your changes make Blackwell Capital the most successful firm in New York, Some people will never accept it, because for them, it's not about results. It's about maintaining a system that benefits them. Then they can leave. Some of them will, and they'll take their influence with them. Are you prepared for that? He thought about the gala, about Trevor's ugly smile and the shocked faces of people he'd considered friends. He thought about Marcus's uncomfortable warnings and the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. He was already losing that world. The question was whether he was willing to let it go entirely. Yes, he said finally. I'm prepared. The board meeting came 3 days later. Ethan walked into the conference room to find 8 faces arranged around the table, and he could read the verdict in their expressions before anyone spoke. Robert Keene sat at the far end, his discomfort visible. Patricia Summers, the investor who had questioned him about diversity, looked cautiously optimistic. The others ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. Charles Whitmore, the board chairman and a man Ethan had worked with for 15 years, cleared his throat. Ethan, thank you for coming. It's my company, Charles. Where else would I be? That's actually what we need to discuss. Charles folded his hands on the table. There's concern among several board members about recent events. The incident at the gala, the media attention, the rapid organizational changes. Some feel that you're allowing personal matters to influence your professional judgment. Some, which means not all. Ethan looked around the table. Who wants to say it to my face? Gregory Davidson, no relation to the VP he'd fired, but clearly aligned with him, leaned forward. Fine, I'll say it. You've spent the last month dismantling systems that have worked for 2 decades. You've fired loyal employees, alienated long-standing investors, and made yourself a target of media scrutiny, all because you're dating someone who's made you feel guilty about how you've built this company. Is that what you think? Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. It's what everyone thinks. Gregory gestured around the table. You punched a man at a charity gala, Ethan, on camera. Do you understand how that makes us look? How that makes our firm look? I punched a man who publicly degraded the woman I care about, Ethan corrected. And I'd do it again. That's exactly the problem. Gregory's voice rose. You're making decisions based on emotion, not strategy. You're prioritizing a relationship over the reputation of this firm. No, Ethan stood, planting his hands on the table. I'm prioritizing basic human decency over maintaining a culture that allowed men like Trevor Ashford to say whatever they wanted without consequences. I'm prioritizing excellence over comfort. And yes, I'm prioritizing the woman I love over the approval of people who think my relationship is somehow a threat to business. The room went silent. Patricia Summers smiled slightly. The woman you love, Charles repeated carefully. You're saying this is serious. I'm saying Nyla Reed is the most remarkable person I've ever met. I'm saying she saw through every defense I'd built and challenged me to be better. And I'm saying that if this board wants to punish me for finally giving a damn about something other than profit margins, then you're welcome to try. Gregory started to respond, but Patricia cut him off. I'd like to see the employee satisfaction data you mentioned in your memo, Ethan. He pulled out his tablet, projecting the charts onto the screen at the end of the room. Employee satisfaction is up 18% across all departments. Turnover is down 22%. We've received applications from candidates at top-tier firms who previously wouldn't have considered us. And our last 3 hires, all women, 2 of them women of color, have already generated measurable improvements in their respective teams. That's 1 month of data, Gregory objected. Hardly conclusive. It's a trend, Patricia countered, and it aligns with every major study on workplace diversity and performance. Companies with diverse leadership teams outperform their competitors. It's not opinion, it's measurable fact. But at what cost? Another board member, Thomas Reeves, spoke up. We've had investors express concerns. They're questioning whether Blackwell Capital still aligns with their values. Then they should divest, Ethan said flatly. If their values include maintaining systems that discriminate, I don't want their money. The room erupted. 3 board members started talking at once, voices overlapping in anger and disbelief. Charles banged his hand on the table. Enough! He looked at Ethan, his expression unreadable. You understand what you're risking here. This isn't just about you. It's about everyone who works for this firm. every pension that depends on our performance, every client who trusts us with their capital. I understand perfectly. Ethan met his gaze without flinching. And I'm telling you that the greatest risk we face isn't change. It's stagnation. The world is moving forward. If we don't move with it, we'll be irrelevant in 10 years. Or bankrupt in 2, Gregory muttered. Patricia stood. I move that we table this discussion and reconvene in 30 days. Give Ethan's initiatives time to show results. Then we can make an informed decision about the company's direction. I second, said another board member, a quiet woman named Linda Zhao, who rarely spoke but commanded respect when she did. Charles looked around the table. All in favor? 5 hands went up, 3 stayed down. Motion carries. Charles looked at Ethan. 30 days. I suggest you make them count. Ethan gathered his materials and left the conference room, his heart pounding. 30 days. It wasn't a victory, but it was a reprieve. He had 1 month to prove that doing the right thing and doing good business weren't mutually exclusive. He called Nyla from the elevator. I have 30 days. To do what? To prove that my changes are good for the company, or they'll force me out. She was quiet for a moment. Then we'd better get to work. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan and Nyla became partners in every sense of the word. She brought her operational expertise to bear on Blackwell Capital, conducting assessments, identifying inefficiencies, redesigning workflows. He brought his institutional knowledge and industry connections, opening doors that had previously been closed to her because of exactly the kind of bias they were trying to dismantle. They worked 18-hour days, fell into bed exhausted, and woke up to do it again. The media attention didn't fade. If anything, it intensified. Another video surfaced, this one from the gala, showing the full context of Ethan's punch. Trevor's ugly comment was audible, and public opinion shifted slightly. Not everywhere, but enough. You're trending on Twitter, Nyla said one evening, scrolling through her phone while they ate takeout in his office. That can't be good. Actually, it's mixed. She showed him the screen. Half the comments are people calling you a white savior who thinks punching one racist will solve systemic problems. The other half are defending you, saying you did what anyone should do when someone they love is attacked. What do you think? She set her phone down. I think you're not a savior. I think you're a man who's trying to be better, and that's worth something. But Ethan, you can't punch every person who says something ignorant. That's not sustainable. I know. He rubbed his face tiredly, but in that moment, hearing him talk about you like that, I couldn't not react. I understand. She reached across the desk, taking his hand. But going forward, we need to be smarter, more strategic. Your board is looking for any excuse to call you unstable. We can't give them ammunition. So what do? We let the work speak for itself. She squeezed his fingers. We show results. We build something that can't be dismissed or explained away. And we stop caring what people like Trevor Ashford think. It sounded simple. It was anything but. The pushback came from unexpected directions. A major client threatened to pull their portfolio unless Ethan stepped down as CEO. An editorial in the Wall Street Journal questioned whether social activism belonged in private equity. Someone leaked his personal cell number, and he started getting threatening calls and messages. But there were bright spots too. A young analyst, a black woman named Sharice Williams, came to his office one afternoon and thanked him. I've worked here for 3 years, she said, her voice shaking slightly. And I've never felt like I could speak up. Never felt like my ideas mattered. But last week in the strategy meeting, when you asked me directly what I thought, she stopped, composing herself. That mattered. It mattered that you saw me. After she left, Ethan sat at his desk for a long time, thinking about visibility, about who got seen and who didn't, about the systems that made some people invisible while elevating others by default. He thought about Nyla, about the way she'd walked into his world fully visible, fully herself, refusing to shrink. And he thought about the version of himself who had almost dismissed her entirely. That night, he wrote another letter. Not to Nyla this time, but to his employees. He sent it company-wide. No corporate speak, no careful PR language. Just honesty. The letter detailed his journey, his awakening to his own blind spots, and his commitment to building a company where everyone could be seen. He acknowledged the discomfort his changes were causing. He acknowledged that some people would choose to leave, and that was their right. But he also made it clear that Blackwell Capital was moving forward, and anyone who wanted to be part of that future was welcome. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of employees reached out, some supporting him, some questioning, some sharing their own experiences with bias and discrimination. His inbox became a chronicle of everything he'd been blind to for 20 years, and reading through the messages was both humbling and devastating. People have been dealing with this the whole time, he told Nyla that night. They were at her apartment, the city lights glowing through her windows. Right under my nose, and I never saw it. Because you didn't have to, she said gently. She was curled up beside him on the couch, her head on his shoulder. That's what privilege is, Ethan, not having to see what doesn't affect you. I hate it. I hate that I was part of the problem. You were, but you're not anymore. That's what matters. She lifted her head to look at him. Change is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be, but you're doing it anyway, and that takes courage. It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like I'm barely keeping my head above water. That's because you're swimming instead of standing on other people's backs. She smiled slightly. Welcome to what the rest of us have been doing our whole lives. The 15-day mark came and went. Results were starting to show. Employee retention was up. Productivity metrics were improving. 2 major hires, one from Goldman Sachs, one from McKinsey, accepted offers specifically because of Blackwell's new direction. Patricia Summers sent Ethan a private email congratulating him on the progress and promising her continued support on the board. But Gregory Davidson and his allies weren't backing down. Ethan started hearing rumors of a coup, board members aligning to force him out regardless of results. They were framing it as a question of leadership style, of temperament, of whether someone so emotionally volatile should be running a major firm. They're going to make their move at the next meeting, Robert warned him over lunch. Gregory's been calling board members individually. He's building a coalition. Can he win? Maybe. Charles is on the fence. If Gregory gets him, you're done. Ethan processed this, his mind already strategizing. What does Charles want? Stability? Predictability? He's a good man, but he's risk-averse. He wants to know that the company will survive this transition. Then I need to show him it will. But before he could formulate a plan, the story broke. Someone leaked Ethan's personal letter to the press, the one he'd sent to employees, full of his admissions of past blindness and current struggle. It appeared in full on a business news site, framed as evidence of his instability, his emotional decision-making, his inability to separate personal growth from professional leadership. The comments section was brutal. People called him weak, performative, a man having a public breakdown disguised as enlightenment. Conservative outlets picked it up, using him as an example of woke capitalism gone wrong. Progressive outlets were only slightly kinder, questioning whether one man's personal redemption arc should be news at all. Ethan read through it all, feeling exposed in a way he'd never experienced. The letter had been meant for his employees, people who knew him, who understood the context. Seeing it dissected by strangers who had no investment in his actual growth felt like being flayed alive. Turn it off, Nyla said. She was at his apartment, had come over as soon as the story hit. Stop reading the comments. They think I'm a joke. Some of them do. Others see what you're actually doing. She took his laptop, closed it firmly. But Ethan, you can't measure your progress by public opinion. That's a losing game. You measure it by the impact you're having on the people who work for you, on the culture you're building. What if it's not enough? The question came out raw. What if I do everything right and still lose the company? Then you lose it. She cupped his face in her hands. But you don't lose yourself. You don't lose the growth you've achieved, and you don't lose me. You'd stay? Even if I wasn't... He gestured vaguely at the closed laptop, at the version of himself that used to command respect and fear in equal measure. Especially then. Her eyes were fierce. I didn't fall for Ethan Blackwell, billionaire CEO. I fell for the man who was brave enough to question everything he'd built, who was willing to tear down his own walls even when it hurt. That man, the real one, is worth 1,000 companies. He kissed her then, desperate and grateful, and she kissed him back with equal intensity. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. The words felt both terrifying and inevitable. "I should have said it before. I love you." Nyla's breath caught. "Ethan, you don't have to say it back. I just need you to know. Whatever happens with the board, whatever comes next, I love you. You changed my life. You changed me. And I'm grateful for every moment, even the hard ones." Tears gathered in her eyes. "You impossible man. Is that a yes?" She laughed, the sound breaking slightly. "I love you too. Even when you're infuriating, even when you make everything more complicated. I love you." They held each other as the city glittered outside the windows. Two people learning to be vulnerable in a world that punished vulnerability, learning to choose love when fear would have been easier. The next morning, Ethan received an unexpected call. Charles Whitmore wanted to meet. Not at the office, somewhere private. They met at a small coffee shop in Greenwich Village, far from the usual haunts of Manhattan's financial elite. Charles was already there when Ethan arrived, looking older than he had at the board meeting, more uncertain. "Thank you for coming," Charles said as Ethan sat down. "You're the board chairman. When you call, I come." Even knowing I might be calling to tell you it's over, Ethan's stomach tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Even then." Charles studied him for a long moment. "I read your letter, the one that leaked. And I think it's the bravest thing I've seen in 30 years of business." Charles's voice was quiet. "Do you know why I've been on the fence about supporting you? Because the changes are risky. No, because they remind me of who I used to be." Charles looked down at his coffee. "I was like you once. Young, idealistic, wanting to change the world. But the system grinds that out of you. It rewards conformity. It punishes anyone who questions too loudly. And eventually you stop questioning. You tell yourself you're being pragmatic, strategic, but really, you're just protecting yourself." Ethan leaned forward. "Charles, I've been protecting myself for 20 years, Charles continued. Building wealth, maintaining relationships, never rocking the boat. And you know what? I'm miserable. I've got money and status and absolutely no idea who I am underneath it all." He finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "You're fighting for something real, something that matters. And I've been too afraid to support you because supporting you means confronting everything I've failed to do." "It's not too late," Ethan said quietly. "Isn't it?" "No." Ethan reached across the table. "Charles, you have power. You have influence. You can choose to use it differently. It's never too late." Charles's hand trembled slightly as he gripped Ethan's. "Gregory's going to push for your removal at the next meeting. He has the votes." "I know. But he doesn't have mine." Charles's voice strengthened. "And I'm going to make sure he doesn't get Linda's or Patricia's either. I'm going to fight for you, Ethan, the way you're fighting for something better." Relief crashed through Ethan so powerfully he could barely speak. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. But I promise you this. I'm not going to let them destroy you for trying to be better. Not without a fight." They finished their coffee-talking strategy, planning how to counter Gregory's coalition, identifying which board members might be persuaded. When they parted ways, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. He called Nyla immediately. "Charles is with us." "Thank God," he heard the relief in her voice. "Does that give you enough votes?" "Maybe. It's going to be close." He paused at a crosswalk, watching the city move around him. "But Nyla, even if we lose, even if they force me out, I don't regret any of this." "I know you don't. I mean it. You gave me something I didn't know I was missing. You gave me a reason to be more than just successful. And whatever happens next, I'm going to keep fighting. For the company if I can. For the principles if I can't." "Ethan." Her voice was soft. "Come home. Your place or mine?" "Ours." The word hung between them, full of promise. "Come home to me." He changed direction, heading toward Brooklyn, toward Nyla, toward a future that was uncertain, but finally felt like his own. The 30-day mark arrived like a storm front, heavy with anticipation and the weight of everything Ethan had fought to build. He woke at 5 in the morning in Nyla's apartment, her body warm against his, and for a moment allowed himself the luxury of simply breathing. Outside, Brooklyn was still dark, the city holding its breath before dawn. In 6 hours, the board would convene. In 6 hours, everything he'd worked for would either be validated or destroyed. Nyla stirred beside him, her hand finding his in the darkness. "You're awake." "Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." She shifted closer, her voice still rough with sleep. "Are you ready?" "I don't know." The admission felt easier now, after weeks of learning that uncertainty wasn't weakness. "Charles is with us, Patricia and Linda too, but Gregory's been working the others hard. Robert told me yesterday that Thomas Reeves is still undecided, and we need his vote." "What does Reeves want?" "Proof." Ethan turned to face her in the dim light. He wants to see that the changes aren't just morally right, but financially sound. That diversity isn't charity, it's strategy. "Then show him." Nyla's eyes caught the first hint of dawn coming through the window. "You have the data, employee retention, productivity metrics, the new hires who are already outperforming expectations. Make the business case so clear he can't ignore it. And if it's not enough." She was quiet for a moment, her thumb tracing circles on the back of his hand. "Then you walk away knowing you did everything you could, that you chose integrity over comfort. That matters, Ethan. Even if you lose the company, that matters." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, drawing strength from her certainty. They had become each other's anchor over these weeks, learning to lean into vulnerability instead of away from it. Whatever happened today, they would face it together. By 7, they were dressed and reviewing his presentation one final time over coffee. Nyla had helped him refine the slides, stripping away corporate jargon in favor of clear, undeniable data. The story the numbers told was compelling. Blackwell Capital was performing better across every meaningful metric since Ethan had initiated his changes. Employee satisfaction was up 23%. Turnover had decreased by 30%. 3 major clients who had initially expressed concern had since increased their investments after meeting the new leadership team. This section here, Nyla pointed to a slide showing demographic breakdowns of new hires. Don't just show the diversity, show the qualifications. The degrees from top institutions, the years of experience, the specific value each person brings. Make it impossible for anyone to claim you're sacrificing merit for representation. Ethan nodded, making the adjustment. Gregory's going to argue that short-term gains don't guarantee long-term success. Then remind him that long-term success requires adapting to changing markets. That the world's largest asset managers are already prioritizing ESG criteria, that clients increasingly want to work with firms that reflect their values, that the talent pipeline is shifting, and companies that don't adapt will be left behind. She set down her coffee mug. You're not asking the board to choose between profit and principles. You're showing them that the two are aligned. When did you become such an expert on board politics? I've been consulting for 15 years, Ethan. I've sat through more board meetings than you can imagine. She smiled slightly. The trick is making them think the conclusion was their idea all along. At 8:30, Ethan's phone buzzed, a text from Charles. Gregory just arrived with his attorney. This is going to get ugly. Be prepared. Ethan showed Nyla the message. Her expression tightened. An attorney? He's not taking chances. Ethan stood, gathering his materials. He wants this done legally, cleanly, no room for appeal. Then we make sure there's nothing to appeal. Nyla rose with him, straightening his tie with careful hands. You are the best thing that's happened to that company in years. You've brought in top talent, improved culture, increased performance. The numbers don't lie, Ethan. Trust them. He caught her hands, holding them against his chest. Come with me. She blinked. What? To the meeting. Come with me. The idea crystallized as he spoke. You've been part of this from the beginning. Your insights, your expertise, they've shaped everything I've done. I want the board to see that, to understand that this isn't about one man's crisis. It's about building something better, together. Ethan, I don't think I need you there. His voice was steady. Not as my consultant, not as my girlfriend, as my partner, in every sense of the word. Nyla searched his face, and he saw the moment she understood what he was really asking. This wasn't just about the board meeting. This was about the future he wanted to build with her, about refusing to compartmentalize the personal and professional when they were so deeply intertwined. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll come." They arrived at Blackwell Capital at 9:15. The building looked the same as always, glass and steel reaching toward a cloudless sky, but Ethan felt as if he were seeing it with new eyes. This place had defined him for 20 years. It had been his identity, his purpose, his measure of self-worth. Now it was just a building. Important, yes. Worth fighting for, absolutely. But no longer the sum total of who he was. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. Claire met them in the lobby, her expression tight with worry. "Mr. Blackwell, the board is already assembling. Mr. Davidson brought outside counsel. And there are—" She hesitated, glancing at Nyla. "There are several reporters in the plaza. Someone must have tipped them off." Of course they did. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Gregory wants this public. Wants to make sure if he takes me down, everyone knows about it." "Then let's give them something to report," Nyla said quietly. She linked her arm through his, the gesture both intimate and defiant. "We walk in together. Let them see that you're not ashamed of any of this." They crossed the lobby with measured steps, and Ethan felt the shift in atmosphere as employees recognized them. Conversations paused, heads turned, but instead of the judgment he'd feared, he saw something else in many faces. Support. Solidarity. Charisse Williams, the young analyst, gave him a small nod of encouragement as they passed. The boardroom was on the 42nd floor, all windows and expensive furniture designed to project power. 8 board members were already seated when Ethan and Nyla entered. Gregory Davidson sat at one end of the table, a sharp-suited attorney beside him. Charles Whitmore occupied the chairman's seat, his expression carefully neutral. Patricia Summers and Linda Zhao sat together, their body language suggesting a united front. Thomas Reeves was studying his tablet, deliberately not looking up. "Ethan." Charles acknowledged him with a nod, then his gaze shifted to Nyla. "Ms. Reed, I wasn't aware you'd be joining us." "I invited her," Ethan said, pulling out a chair for Nyla before taking his own seat. "Everything I've accomplished over the last month has been informed by her expertise. She's been an integral part of this transformation." Gregory's attorney leaned forward. "Mr. Chairman, I must object. This is a private board meeting. Ms. Reed is not a board member, nor is she an employee of Blackwell Capital." "She's here as my advisor," Ethan said calmly, "which is within my rights as CEO." "Your rights as CEO," Gregory interjected, his voice cold, "are precisely what we're here to discuss." Charles raised a hand. "Let's maintain civility. We're here to review the last 30 days of operations and make a determination about the company's direction. Ethan, you have the floor. Make your case." Ethan stood, connecting his laptop to the presentation system. The first slide appeared on the screen, a simple title: 30 Days of Transformation, Results and Vision. "A month ago," he began, his voice steady, "I stood in this room and told you I was committed to changing how we operate. Not because it was trendy, not because of external pressure, but because I finally understood that the way we'd been doing business was fundamentally broken. Today, I'm here to show you that doing the right thing and doing profitable business are not mutually exclusive." He clicked to the next slide, showing employee satisfaction metrics. In 30 days, employee satisfaction has increased 23% across all departments. Exit interviews that previously cited culture concerns as a primary reason for departure have decreased by 42%. We've had 0 resignations from senior staff since implementing the new policies. "Because you fired anyone who disagreed with you," Gregory muttered. "No." Ethan's gaze was sharp. "Because I fired one person who had documented evidence of discrimination in his performance evaluations. Everyone else chose to stay and engage with the changes." The next slide showed recruitment data. "We've received applications from candidates at Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, McKinsey, and BCG. In the previous 6 months, we had 3 applications from these firms combined. In the last 30 days, we've had 47. 8 have accepted offers. All of them cited our commitment to inclusive culture as a deciding factor." Thomas Reeves looked up for the first time. What's the retention projection for these new hires? Based on industry standards and our improved satisfaction metrics, we project 92% retention over the next 2 years. That's 15% higher than our historical average. Nyla leaned forward slightly. If I may add something, Mr. Reeves, I've worked with over 200 companies in my career. The correlation between inclusive culture and talent retention is one of the most statistically significant relationships in organizational research. What Ethan has built here in 30 days, most companies take years to achieve. Ms. Reed, Gregory's attorney said, his tone patronizing, while I'm sure your expertise is valuable, we're discussing the governance of a major financial institution. This isn't about feelings or social experiments. It's about fiduciary responsibility. Then let's talk about fiduciary responsibility. Nyla's voice was calm but cut like steel. She stood, moving to stand beside Ethan. Mr. Davidson, do you know what the largest investment management firms in the world are prioritizing right now? Gregory frowned. I don't see how. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, together they manage over $20 trillion. All three have made public commitments to ESG investing. They're actively seeking partners who demonstrate strong environmental, social, and governance practices. Blackwell Capital's traditional approach was already making you less competitive for these partnerships. Ethan's changes position you to capture that market. She clicked to a slide Ethan hadn't seen before, one she must have added that morning. It showed projected growth scenarios, revenue forecasts, market share analysis. If you maintain the status quo, industry trends suggest you'll see stagnant growth and declining relevance over the next 5 years. If you continue on Ethan's current trajectory, you're positioned to increase market share by 12 to 18%, attract higher value clients, and outperform your competitors. The room was silent. Even Gregory looked caught off guard. Patricia Summers smiled. That's quite compelling, Ms. Reed. It's reality, Nyla said simply. The question isn't whether change is necessary. The market has already answered that. The question is whether this board has the courage to lead that change or wait to be disrupted by firms that do. Ethan felt something expand in his chest. Pride, gratitude, love, all mixed together. Nyla had just made the case he'd been building toward, but with a clarity and authority that commanded respect. Gregory recovered first. Fine words. But let's not forget the incident at the Ashford Gala. Mr. Blackwell physically assaulted a guest, on camera. That demonstrates a lack of judgment, a volatility that's incompatible with leadership. That demonstrates, Charles said quietly, speaking for the first time since the presentation began, that Ethan has a spine. Trevor Ashford publicly degraded Ms. Reed in front of a room full of people who said nothing. Ethan did what any decent person should do. He defended someone he cares about. By punching him? Gregory's voice rose. That's your defense? No, Ethan said. My defense is that I'm human. I made a decision in the moment that I don't entirely regret, even though I recognize it wasn't optimal. But Gregory, let's be honest about what this is really about. You're not concerned about my judgment. You're concerned that I'm disrupting a system that's benefited men like us for decades. You're concerned that accountability feels like persecution when you've never had to be accountable before. Gregory's face flushed. How dare you? I dare because it's true. Ethan's voice was calm but implacable. You aligned with Davidson because you see yourselves in him. You've built careers on the same unexamined assumptions, the same unconscious bias. And now someone's holding up a mirror and you don't like what you see. This is outrageous, Gregory's attorney interjected. Mr. Chairman, I move that we proceed immediately to a vote on Mr. Blackwell's removal. Seconded, Gregory added quickly. Charles looked around the table. Before we vote, does anyone else wish to speak? Linda Zhao raised her hand. She was a petite woman in her 60s, a former operations executive who rarely spoke but commanded respect when she did. I've served on this board for 8 years. In that time, I've watched this firm make the same mistakes repeatedly. We hire talented people and lose them to competitors. We miss market opportunities because we're too insular. We pride ourselves on tradition while the world moves forward without us. She looked directly at Gregory. Mr. Davidson, you say Ethan is disrupting the system. Good. The system needed disrupting. What he's built in 30 days, The culture, the talent pipeline, the market positioning, it's more valuable than anything we've accomplished in the last 5 years. Linda, Gregory started, but she held up a hand. I'm not finished. I've also watched Ethan's personal transformation. I've seen him question himself, admit mistakes, and grow in ways that men at his level rarely do. That takes courage. More courage than maintaining the status quo ever requires. She turned to Ethan. I'm voting to keep you as CEO, and I'm recommending we extend your authority to continue these changes company-wide. Patricia Summers nodded. I concur with Linda. The data is clear. The trajectory is positive. Removing Ethan now would be strategic malpractice. Thomas Reeves cleared his throat. All eyes turned to him. He was the swing vote, and everyone in the room knew it. I've been struggling with this, he said slowly. Not because I doubt the data. Miss Reed is right. The numbers are compelling, but because change is uncomfortable. It requires admitting that what we've been doing was insufficient. He paused, his gaze settling on Ethan. I had a conversation with my daughter last week. She's 28, works in tech. When I told her about this situation, she said something that stuck with me. She said, Dad, companies that resist diversity don't survive. They become case studies in what not to do. I don't want Blackwell Capital to be a cautionary tale. He straightened in his chair. I'm voting to retain Ethan as CEO, with the condition that we formalize these diversity initiatives into company policy, with measurable benchmarks and regular board oversight. Relief crashed through Ethan, but he kept his expression neutral. That was 5 votes. He had 5 votes. Charles looked at Gregory. It appears we have a majority. Unless you'd like to withdraw your motion? Gregory's jaw worked furiously. Call the vote. All in favor of removing Ethan Blackwell as CEO of Blackwell Capital. Charles's voice was formal. 3 hands went up. Gregory's, his attorney's proxy, and 1 other board member Ethan had known would vote against him. All in favor of maintaining Ethan Blackwell as CEO and supporting his continued transformation initiatives? 5 hands rose. Charles, Patricia, Linda, Thomas, and 1 other. The motion to remove fails, Charles declared. Ethan Blackwell remains CEO of Blackwell Capital. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Gregory stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is a mistake. You're all going to regret this. Perhaps, Charles said mildly. But it's our mistake to make. This meeting is adjourned. Gregory stormed out, his attorney trailing behind him. The remaining board members stood, some congratulating Ethan, others looking uncertain but accepting. Patricia pulled Nyla aside, speaking to her in low tones that ended with both women smiling. When the room finally cleared, only Charles remained. He approached Ethan, extending his hand. You did it. We did it, Ethan corrected, gripping his hand firmly. I couldn't have won without your support. I should have given it sooner. Charles glanced toward the windows, toward the city spreading below. I've been thinking about what you said, about protecting ourselves, about building walls. He turned back. I'm stepping down from the board. Ethan's eyes widened. Charles, not immediately. I'll stay through the transition, help you solidify support. But Ethan, watching you fight for this, it made me realize I've spent 20 years avoiding similar fights. I have grandchildren now. I want them to grow up in a world where people like you are the norm, not the exception. Where standing up for what's right doesn't require this much courage because it's just expected. His voice roughened. I'm going to use whatever time I have left to try to build that world. But I can't do it from a boardroom where I've been part of the problem. Ethan embraced him, something he'd never done in 15 years of working together. Thank you for everything. When Charles left, Ethan turned to find Nyla watching him from across the room. She was backlit by the windows, the morning sun turning her into a silhouette, and he was struck by how far they'd both come, how much they'd fought for and won. We did it, he said. She crossed to him, sliding her arms around his waist. You did it. I just provided data. You provided everything. He cupped her face in his hands. The insight, the courage, the vision for what this could be. I couldn't have done any of this without you. That's not true. It is. His voice was firm. Nyla, you didn't just change my company, you changed me. You made me see that vulnerability isn't weakness, that growth requires discomfort, that love is the bravest thing a person can choose. Tears gathered in her eyes. Ethan, I know we said we'd take things slow, that we'd see how this played out, but I don't want slow anymore. He took a breath, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs. I want forever. I want to wake up next to you every morning and build something meaningful together. I want to face whatever comes next knowing you're beside me. Are you... She stopped, her voice catching. What are you saying? I'm saying marry me. The words felt both terrifying and right. Not someday, not when things settle down, now, while everything is still uncertain and messy and real. Marry me because you believe in what we're building, because you love me even when I'm infuriating, because we're better together than we ever were apart. Nyla was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. You don't have a ring. I don't need a ring. I just need your answer. She laughed through the tears, the sound bright and broken. You're supposed to get on one knee, you know. I've been on my knees for weeks, he said, smiling, metaphorically speaking. This time, I'm standing. I'm asking you as an equal, as a partner, as a man who sees exactly who you are and loves every part of it. Nyla searched his face, and he saw the moment she decided. Saw the fear give way to certainty, the caution transform into courage. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. He kissed her then, there in the boardroom where he'd just fought for his professional life, and felt more victorious than any business win had ever made him feel. This was what mattered. Not the company, not the money, not the power. This woman in his arms who had seen past every defense to the man he was capable of becoming. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Nyla pressed her forehead to his. Your board is going to have opinions about this. Let them, he grinned. I just survived a coup attempt. I think I can handle opinions about my personal life. The media is going to have a field day. They already are. Might as well give them something genuine to report. She pulled back to look at him, her expression turning serious. Ethan, you understand what this means, right? It's not just about you and me anymore. It's about what we represent. People are going to project their own struggles onto us, their own hopes and fears. We become a symbol whether we want to be or not. I know. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. And maybe that's okay. Maybe someone needs to see that change is possible, that love can exist across the divide society tries to enforce, that growth, real growth, is worth every uncomfortable moment. When did you become so wise? About 5 minutes after I met you. He kissed her again, softly this time. Come on, let's go tell the world. They left the boardroom hand in hand, and as they walked through Blackwell Capital's offices, Ethan saw employees noticing them, saw the smiles and knowing looks. News traveled fast in buildings like this. By the time they reached the lobby, half the company probably knew he'd proposed. The reporters were still outside, cameras ready. Ethan felt Nyla tense slightly beside him as they approached the glass doors. We don't have to do this now, he said quietly. We can wait. Plan something more formal. No. She squeezed his hand. You said it yourself. We face things together. Let's show them what that looks like. They stepped outside into a barrage of shouted questions and camera flashes. Ethan raised a hand, waiting for the noise to settle. I have a brief statement, he said, his voice carrying across the plaza. This morning, the Blackwell Capital Board voted to support my continued leadership and the transformation initiatives I've been implementing. More importantly, he turned to Nyla, seeing his own fierce joy reflected in her face. This morning, Nyla Reed agreed to marry me. The plaza erupted. Some reporters looked stunned. Others immediately started shouting new questions, but Ethan ignored them all. He pulled Nyla close and kissed her in front of the cameras, in front of his employees watching from the windows above, in front of the entire city that had watched their relationship become a referendum on change and courage. When they finally pulled apart, Nyla was laughing. That's going to be on the news tonight. Good, Ethan said. Let them see what winning actually looks like. They walked away from the cameras, from the shouted questions, from the noise and spectacle. They walked toward Brooklyn, toward home, toward a future they would build together, one brave choice at a time. Behind them, the reporters were already filing their stories. By evening, the news would spread across social media, across news sites, across the interconnected web of modern communication. Some would celebrate them, others would criticize. But none of that mattered as much as the simple truth they'd discovered together. That love, when chosen with open eyes and brave hearts, could transform not just two people, but the world they touched. That redemption wasn't a destination, but a daily practice of choosing better, doing better, being better. That the walls people built to protect themselves often became the prisons that trapped them. And that sometimes, the greatest act of courage was simply allowing yourself to be seen, fully, honestly, without armor, and trusting that you were enough. The engagement announcement hit the news cycle like a lightning strike, polarizing and incendiary in equal measure. By that evening, Ethan and Nyla's faces were everywhere, splashed across social media, dissected on cable news, analyzed in opinion pieces that ranged from celebratory to scathing. Conservative pundits called it a publicity stunt, a calculated move to deflect from Ethan's controversial business decisions. Progressive voices questioned whether one privileged man's personal growth should be news at all, whether the narrative centered too much on his redemption and not enough on the systemic issues that made his awakening necessary in the first place. But there were other voices too. Younger voices, hopeful voices, people who saw in their story a reflection of possibilities they'd been told didn't exist. Interracial couples who felt seen, women of color in corporate America who felt validated, men grappling with their own privilege who saw a roadmap for change. Ethan and Nyla watched it all unfold from her apartment, curled together on the couch with takeout containers scattered on the coffee table. His phone kept buzzing with messages, some congratulatory, some threatening, all of them overwhelming in their intensity. "Turn it off," Nyla said finally, taking the phone from his hand and setting it face down on the table. "You can't control the narrative. You can only control how you respond to it." "And how should I respond?" "By living your life." She shifted to face him more fully. "By showing up every day and doing the work. By being the man you committed to becoming, whether cameras are watching or not." He studied her face, this woman who had walked through fire with him and emerged stronger. "Are you okay? With all of this?" "Honestly," she exhaled slowly, "I'm exhausted. I'm angry at some of the things being said. I'm frustrated that my accomplishments are being reduced to Billionaire's fiancé in half the headlines. But I'm also," she paused, searching for words, "I'm also grateful. Because we chose this. We knew it wouldn't be easy, and we chose it anyway. I'm sorry you're dealing with this because of me. Don't." Her voice was firm. "Don't apologize for fighting for us. Don't apologize for being brave enough to change. The world needs to be uncomfortable right now. That's how progress happens." They talked late into the night, planning not just their wedding, but the life they wanted to build together. Nyla wanted to expand her consulting firm, bring on partners who shared her vision, create opportunities for other women of color in business. Ethan wanted to use his platform to mentor emerging leaders, to speak publicly about privilege and accountability, to prove that transformation wasn't performative but sustainable. "I want to do more than just fix my own company," he said as dawn began to break over the city. "I want to help other companies do the same, create a playbook for institutional change that actually works. Then we do it together." Nyla laced her fingers through his. "Reed Blackwell Consulting. We combine my operational expertise with your industry access. We build something that outlasts both of us." The name settled between them, solid and right. Reed Blackwell. Not his name alone, not hers, theirs. A partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. "I like that," Ethan said quietly. "I like us having something that belongs to both of us." "Good," she kissed him softly, "because I'm not interested in being Mrs. Ethan Blackwell. I'm interested in being Nyla Reed, who happens to be building a life with you. Wouldn't have it any other way." The following weeks brought both challenges and unexpected victories. Gregory Davidson resigned from the board entirely, taking 2 allies with him and making vague statements about philosophical differences that fooled no one. But their departure created space for new board members, and Ethan worked with Charles to recruit candidates who represented the diversity he was trying to build: a former nonprofit executive, a technology entrepreneur, a labor economist whose research focused on workplace equity. The transformation at Blackwell Capital continued, sometimes smoothly, often with friction. There were difficult conversations, uncomfortable confrontations, moments when Ethan had to choose between expedience and integrity. But each time, he chose integrity. Each time, he felt the foundation beneath him grow stronger. Charisse Williams, the young analyst who had thanked him after that first board meeting, came to his office one afternoon with a proposal. She and several other employees wanted to create an employee resource group focused on professional development for underrepresented staff. "We've seen the changes you're making at the top," she explained, her confidence growing as she spoke. "But we want to make sure they reach every level. We want mentorship programs, sponsorship opportunities, clear pathways for advancement that don't require us to assimilate into a culture that wasn't built for us." Ethan listened, taking notes, asking questions. 6 months ago, he would have praised the initiative and then delegated it to HR, where it would have died quietly. Now he committed company resources, executive sponsorship, and his own time to serve as a mentor. "This matters," he told Charisse as she left his office. "Thank you for pushing us to be better." She smiled. "You're welcome. But Mr. Blackwell, we're not going to stop pushing. This is just the beginning." "Good," he said, meaning it. "Don't ever stop." Planning the wedding became its own form of education. Nyla wanted something intimate but meaningful, something that honored both their backgrounds without erasing either. They chose a venue in Brooklyn, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and huge windows overlooking the river, and worked with a planner who specialized in intercultural ceremonies. "I want my father to walk me down the aisle," Neela said one evening as they reviewed plans. "But I also want us to walk out together at the end, as equals." "I love that." Ethan made a note. "What about your mother? Will she come?" Nyla's expression grew complicated. "I don't know. We've been talking more since the engagement was announced. She's proud, I think, but also worried. She remembers what it was like being married to my father, being one of the only black families in their neighborhood. The stares, the assumptions, the casual cruelty. She's afraid I'm signing up for that all over again." "Are you?" Ethan asked gently. "Afraid of that?" "Sometimes." Her honesty was characteristic, unflinching. "But I'm more afraid of living a small life, of letting fear make my decisions. I'd rather fight for something real than hide from what might hurt." He pulled her close, overwhelmed by her courage. "You're the bravest person I've ever met." "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being careful." She looked up at him. "Do you know what it's like spending your whole life managing other people's comfort? Making yourself smaller so they feel bigger? I'm done with that. I want to take up space. I want to be fully myself, even when it makes people uncomfortable." "Then we'll be uncomfortable together," Ethan promised, "and we'll build a life where neither of us has to shrink." His own family presented different complications. Ethan's parents had died years earlier, but he had a sister, Margaret, who lived in Connecticut with her husband and 3 children. They'd been distant for years, moving in different circles, maintaining connection through obligatory holiday cards and occasional phone calls. When Ethan called to tell her about the engagement, the silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably long. "Margaret?" he prompted. "I'm here." Her voice was tight. "I'm just surprised." "Because I'm getting married?" "Because of who you're marrying." She rushed on before he could respond. "Ethan, I don't have a problem with it. With her, I just worry about you, about the attention this is getting. The criticism." "I don't care about the criticism." "But I do." The words burst out of her. "You're my brother. I've watched you build this incredible life, and now you're burning it all down for someone you barely know." Ethan felt anger flash through him, hot and immediate, but he forced himself to breathe. "I'm not burning anything down. I'm building something better. And Nyla isn't someone I barely know. She's someone who saw me clearly for the first time in my life and loved me anyway." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "Are you happy?" she repeated. Because I've known you for 40 years, Ethan, and I've never heard you talk about another person the way you talk about her. I've never heard you sound so alive. I am happy, he said, the truth of it settling into his bones. Happier than I've been in my entire life. Then I'm happy for you. Her voice softened. I'm sorry if I sounded... I just love you, and I worry. But if she makes you happy, if she's good to you, then I want to meet her. I want to know the woman who finally got through to my impossible brother. They arranged a dinner 2 weeks later. Margaret and her husband drove down from Connecticut, and the five of them met at a restaurant in Manhattan. Neutral territory, Nyla called it, a place where no one had home advantage. Ethan was nervous in a way he hadn't been since adolescence, desperate for his sister to see Nyla the way he did. But within 15 minutes, his worry dissolved. Nyla and Margaret fell into easy conversation, discovering shared interests in architecture and urban planning. Margaret's husband, a professor of history, engaged Nyla in a discussion about economic mobility that lasted through 3 courses. By the time dessert arrived, Margaret was showing Nyla photos of her children and extracting promises that they'd visit soon. I like her, Margaret told Ethan when Nyla excused herself to take a call. She's smart, grounded, completely unimpressed by you. Perfect match. She is, isn't she? Ethan smiled, watching Nyla through the restaurant windows, animated as she talked on her phone. But Ethan, Margaret's expression grew serious. Be prepared. Not everyone is going to be as open-minded. Some people will never accept this. Never accept her. I know. And you're okay with that? With potentially losing people you've known for years? He thought about Trevor Ashford's ugly smile. About Gregory Davidson's cold dismissal. About the board members who had voted against him. If accepting Nyla means losing people who can't see her value, then I'm not losing anything worth keeping. Margaret nodded slowly. You really have changed. She changed me. He met his sister's eyes, and I'm grateful for it every single day. The wedding itself was set for late spring, 6 months after the proposal. They wanted time to do it right, to build something meaningful rather than rushed. But 2 months before the ceremony, an unexpected complication arose. Ethan received a call from James Harrington, the investor who had first introduced him to Nyla, asking to meet urgently. They met at the same coffee shop where Ethan and Charles had talked months earlier, and Harrington's expression was grave as Ethan sat down. I have some difficult news, Harrington said without preamble. Trevor Ashford is filing a lawsuit, assault and battery. He's claiming psychological damages and demanding 7 figures in compensation. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Let me guess. It's not really about the money. No. Harrington's voice was grim. It's about forcing you into a public trial, about putting you on the stand to defend yourself, about making sure your transformation gets litigated in court where every moment, every statement, every past action gets dissected. He wants to destroy me. He wants to prove you haven't really changed, that you're still the same man you always were, just with better PR. Harrington leaned forward. Ethan, my lawyers say we can probably get this dismissed or settled quietly, but it'll take time, and the publicity will follow me right up to my wedding. Ethan rubbed his face. Does Nyla know? I called you first. I need to tell her. He stood, already pulling out his phone. She needs to hear this from me. Harrington caught his arm. Ethan, whatever you decide, fight or settle, I'm with you. You've shown more integrity in 6 months than most men show in a lifetime. Don't let Trevor Ashford take that away from you. Ethan found Nyla at her office, buried in work but brightening when she saw him. The brightness faded when she saw his expression. What happened? He told her everything. The lawsuit, the timing, Trevor's transparent attempt to weaponize the legal system to punish him for changing. Nyla listened without interruption, her expression growing harder as he spoke. That vindictive bastard, she said finally. He's doing this to hurt both of us, to punish you for defending me, and to remind me that I'll always be the reason you face consequences. You're not the reason. His bigotry is the reason. The legal system might not see it that way. She stood, pacing her office. If this goes to trial, they'll put your whole life under a microscope. Every decision, every relationship, every moment of your past. They'll try to prove you're a hypocrite, That your changes were superficial. Then I'll prove they weren't. Ethan's voice was steady. Nyla, I'm not settling. I'm not giving Trevor the satisfaction of thinking he can intimidate me into silence. If he wants a trial, he'll get one, and I'll use it as a platform to talk about accountability, about growth, about why punching him was wrong, but why his words were worse. That's incredibly risky. I know. He crossed to her, taking her hands. But I spent 40 years taking the safe path, the path that protected me from scrutiny, from discomfort, from having to examine who I really was. I'm done with safe. I'm choosing truth, even when it's hard. Nyla searched his face. You could lose everything. The company, your reputation, your credibility. I could, but I'd still have you, and that's worth more than everything else combined. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate. You infuriating, courageous, impossible man. Is that a yes? You'll stand with me through a trial? I'll stand with you through anything. She pulled back to look at him. But Ethan, if we do this, if we fight this publicly, we need to be prepared. We need lawyers, a PR strategy, and absolute unity in our story. No cracks, no doubts, no moments of weakness they can exploit. Then let's build that. He smiled slightly. Together. They spent the next 2 months preparing. Ethan hired a legal team that specialized in civil cases, lawyers who understood both the law and the optics. Nyla brought in a crisis communications expert, someone who could help them control the narrative without compromising the truth. They held practice sessions, mock depositions, preparing for every possible question and angle of attack. The trial began 3 weeks before their wedding date. The courthouse was a circus, reporters everywhere, camera crews jockeying for position, protesters on both sides holding signs. Some signs read, "Accountability Matters" and "Stand with Blackwell." Others said "Privileged Punks" and "Justice for Trevor." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense and formal. Trevor Ashford sat at the plaintiff's table, looking smug and wounded in equal measure, his expensive suit and carefully styled hair projecting an image of respectability. His lawyer was a shark named Richard Brennan, known for high-profile cases and aggressive tactics. Ethan sat beside his own legal team, with Nyla directly behind him in the gallery. He could feel her presence like a physical anchor, steadying him when his nerves threatened to spike. The trial lasted 5 days. Trevor's team painted a picture of Ethan as unstable, violent, a man whose supposed transformation was a facade covering deeper issues. They brought in character witnesses, people Ethan had fired or alienated, colleagues who claimed he'd become obsessed with diversity at the expense of business judgment. They played the video of the punch on loop, emphasizing the force, the aggression, the loss of control. But Ethan's team was equally prepared. They called employees who testified about the positive changes at Blackwell Capital, about improved culture and opportunity. They brought in diversity experts who contextualized Ethan's actions within a broader framework of institutional change, and they played the full context of the gala video, making sure the jury heard Trevor's degrading comment about Nyla in crystal clear audio. On the 4th day, Ethan took the stand. Brennan approached like a predator circling prey. "Mr. Blackwell, you claim you've changed, that you're no longer the man you were 6 months ago. But isn't it true that you punched my client, a man you'd known socially for years, simply because he made a comment you didn't like?" "No," Ethan said clearly. "I punched him because he publicly degraded the woman I love, using language designed to dehumanize her based on her race and gender. His comment wasn't something I didn't like. It was verbal violence, and I responded with physical violence. Both were wrong, but they're not equivalent. You're saying your assault was justified? I'm saying it was understandable, even if it wasn't right. I lost control in that moment. I regret that loss of control, but I don't regret defending Nyla. I only regret that I chose the wrong method." Brennan's eyes gleamed. "So you admit you'd do it again?" "No. I'd do better. I'd use my voice instead of my fists. I'd call out his behavior publicly and demand accountability through proper channels. I've learned that violence, even in response to verbal assault, doesn't create change. It just perpetuates harm." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "But make no mistake, I will always defend the people I love. I'll just do it more effectively next time. The jury seemed to lean forward, engaged. Brennan tried several more angles of attack, but Ethan stayed consistent, honest, refusing to either fully justify his actions or completely condemn them. He walked the narrow line between accountability and self-defense. When Nyla took the stand on the fifth day, the courtroom fell silent. She was composed, elegant, and devastatingly clear in her testimony. Trevor Ashford's comment wasn't just offensive, she said when Brennan tried to minimize it. It was part of a pattern of behavior that Black women face constantly. The assumption that we're opportunistic, that our relationships with successful men must be transactional, that we couldn't possibly be valued for our own accomplishments. His words were violence. They were designed to remind me of my place, to put me back in a box that society has been trying to trap Black women in for centuries. But Mr. Blackwell's response, physical violence, you condone that? Brennan pressed. I don't condone it, but I understand it. Nyla's gaze was steady. For the first time in his life, Ethan saw me, really saw me, as a full human being deserving of dignity and respect. And when someone attacked that dignity, he reacted instinctively. Was it perfect? No. Was it legal? No. But it was human, and sometimes humanity is messy. The closing arguments came that afternoon. Trevor's lawyer painted a picture of dangerous precedent, of wealthy men believing they could assault anyone who offended them. Ethan's lawyer spoke about context, about the difference between random violence and defensive response, about the importance of understanding the full story before passing judgment. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Ethan stood with his heart hammering, Nyla's hand gripping his from the gallery behind him. On the count of assault and battery, the foreman read, we find the defendant, Ethan Blackwell, liable. However, we award the plaintiff damages in the amount of $1, finding that while the defendant's actions were technically illegal, they were substantially provoked by the plaintiff's behavior. The courtroom erupted. $1. It was a verdict that held Ethan accountable while essentially vindicating his motivations. Trevor's face went purple with rage. His lawyer immediately stood to object, but the judge banged her gavel. The jury has spoken. This case is concluded. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Ethan made a brief statement, carefully crafted with his legal team. I accept the jury's verdict. I was wrong to use violence, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be held accountable. But I also hope this case has highlighted a larger truth, that words can be violent too, that degrading someone based on their race or gender is not free speech we should tolerate, and that accountability needs to run in both directions. Nyla stood beside him, and when they walked down the courthouse steps together, hand in hand, the cameras captured something the legal system couldn't quantify. Two people choosing each other despite everything, building something real in the wreckage of what came before. The wedding, 3 weeks later, felt like both an ending and a beginning. They married on a May evening with the Brooklyn warehouse transformed into something magical. Lights strung overhead like stars, flowers everywhere, music that blended Nyla's Detroit roots with Ethan's East Coast influences. Nyla's father walked her down the aisle, his pride evident in every step. Ethan's sister served as his best woman, Margaret having insisted she'd earned the role by putting up with him for 4 decades. The ceremony was officiated by a judge they both respected, a woman who had spent her career fighting for justice and equity. These two people, the judge said as they stood before her, have chosen a difficult path. They've chosen to love across divides that society tries to enforce. They've chosen growth over comfort, truth over convenience, and in doing so, they've shown us all what courage really looks like. The vows they wrote themselves were simple but profound. Ethan promised to keep questioning himself, to keep growing, to never become so comfortable that he stopped listening. Nyla promised to be patient with his growth while never compromising her own truth, to build a partnership based on equality, not rescue. I promise, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the tears on his face, to spend every day becoming worthy of your love, to use my privilege to create opportunity, to build a world where no one has to fight as hard as you fought just to be seen. I promise, Nyla replied, her own tears flowing freely, to keep pushing you to be better, to never let you rest on your laurels or hide behind good intentions, to build a life with you that's bigger than both of us. When they kissed as newly married partners, The warehouse erupted in applause. But Ethan barely heard it. He was too focused on the woman in his arms, this force of nature who had walked into his world and remade it entirely. The reception was a celebration unlike any Ethan had experienced, joyful, diverse, authentic. Employees from Blackwell Capital mingled with Nyla's consulting clients. Margaret's children ran around with Nyla's young cousins. Charles Whitmore danced with Patricia Summers, while Robert Keene argued good-naturedly with Nyla's business partner about market trends. During dinner, speeches ranged from funny to profound. Margaret talked about watching her brother transform from someone who measured success in dollars to someone who measured it in impact. Nyla's mother spoke about her initial fears and how Ethan had proven her wrong by showing up, day after day, doing the work of becoming better. "My daughter," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "has always been too big for the boxes people tried to put her in. I'm grateful she found someone who doesn't want her in a box at all, who wants her exactly as she is, brilliant, challenging, and free." But the most meaningful moment came late in the evening when Ethan and Nyla stepped outside for air. The river glittered under the lights of Manhattan across the water, and for a moment they simply stood together in the spring warmth. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Nyla asked. "At the gala, when I didn't care who you were?" "All the time." Ethan pulled her closer. "You terrified me. This confident woman who saw straight through me and wasn't impressed by anything I'd built my identity on." "You weren't so bad yourself." She smiled. "Arrogant, definitely. Blind to your own privilege, absolutely. But there was something underneath all that. Something real. You saw it before I did. I saw the possibility of it." She turned to face him fully. "But you're the one who did the work. You're the one who chose to change, even when it was hard, even when it cost you." "It didn't cost me anything that mattered." He cupped her face in his hands. "It gave me everything. You gave me everything." They stood there as music drifted from the warehouse behind them, as their wedding celebration continued without them for a moment. Two people who had found each other across impossible divides, who had chosen to build something better than what came before. The next morning, they woke in a hotel suite overlooking the park. The city spread before them in morning light. No honeymoon yet. They'd postponed it to focus on launching Reed Blackwell Consulting, the joint venture they'd been planning for months. "Ready to change the world?" Nyla asked, curled against him. "With you?" "Always." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "Though I'm starting to think changing the world might be easier than planning a wedding." She laughed. "The world doesn't have seating charts. The world doesn't have your mother's opinions on floral arrangements, or your sister's very specific ideas about cake flavors." They lay there laughing, two people who had fought through fire to find each other, who had learned that love without growth was stagnation, and growth without love was hollow. The work ahead would be hard. There would be more resistance, more challenges, more moments when doing right felt impossible. But they would face it together, not as savior and saved, not as teacher and student, but as equals building something better than either could achieve alone. 6 months later, Reed Blackwell Consulting announced its first major client, a Fortune 500 company seeking to overhaul its diversity and inclusion practices. A year after that, they published a widely cited paper on institutional change that became required reading at business schools across the country. 18 months after the wedding, Nyla gave a TED Talk about the intersection of race, gender, and corporate power that went viral, sparking conversations in boardrooms worldwide. And Ethan, who had once measured his worth in dollars and deals, found himself measuring it in different metrics. In the young professionals he mentored who went on to break barriers in their own fields. In the companies that reached out for help dismantling their own biases. In the quiet moments when Nyla looked at him and smiled, that particular smile that said she saw him, really saw him, and loved what she saw. He never claimed to be perfect. He never stopped questioning himself. Never stopped listening for his own blind spots. There were missteps and mistakes. Moments when his old habits reasserted themselves, and Nyla had to call him back to accountability. But that was the point. Growth wasn't a destination. It was a daily practice, a constant choosing of better over easy, truth over comfort, love over fear. Years later, when their story had become case studies and cautionary tales and inspiration for others walking similar paths, someone asked Ethan what he'd learned from everything that had happened. He thought about the man he'd been, powerful, protected, blind to his own biases. He thought about Nyla walking into his world and refusing to shrink. He thought about the walls he'd built and the courage it took to tear them down. I learned, he said finally, that the thing I was most afraid of losing, my power, my certainty, my control, was the thing that was keeping me from becoming who I was meant to be. I learned that vulnerability is strength, that questions are more valuable than answers, and that love, real love, doesn't ask you to be less. It challenges you to be more. He looked at Nyla beside him, her hand in his, and felt the truth settle in his bones. I learned that sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is seeing who you really are and loving you enough to demand you become better. And I learned that when you find someone like that, you hold on, you fight for them, you change for them, not because they ask you to, but because they make you want to be worthy of what you're building together. That was a story, not of a man who saved someone or was saved, but of two people who found each other and chose every single day to build something better than what came before, who proved that change was possible, that growth was achievable, that love could bridge even the deepest divides when both people were willing to do the work. The story ended not with perfection, but with possibility. With two people walking forward together, hand in hand, into a future they would write with courage and honesty and the radical belief that they could be more than what they'd been taught to be. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.